Ryan and I just played Quorum. This is the new one from Devir. It's a 2 to 4 player game where you're building a 12-card tableau. On your turn, it's very simple. You're taking a card into your hand, you're playing a card from your hand, but you're manipulating your position on a lot of these different provinces, and there's a ton of different scoring that's going to happen, which is really the crux of the game.
Yeah, that is the whole goal. Really, what you really need to learn in this game is the scoring. Because like David said, the gameplay is simple. You're a senator, thematically, in Rome, building out a 12-card set of things, whether it's buildings, people, military, whatever, trade goods, that are going to score you points. Now, on its most base level, it is about building out this. Now, it's kind of in a grid, but it's not a game about positioning.
No.
It's just getting these 12 cards in front of you, and all 12 of these cards, they're going to score in different ways. And there's a wide variety of ways that these different cards score based on the icon that's in the corner. Some of them are set collections, some of them are having matching things or cascading numbers or multipliers, whatever. All of that, it feels maybe kind of familiar. You've seen games that do this before.
Yeah.
But at the same time that you're working on this, the cards you're playing are also moving you up these different tracks, which is a completely different way to score points as well.
Yeah, so just to go over what you're doing, again, on your turn, you're going to be starting the game with 4 cards. You'll never have more than 4 cards in your hand, and that's important because there's going to be some cards that come in to clog up your hand potentially. But on your turn, you're taking a card from this row, and this row is going to have a number of different cards, a lot of which will be the cards that you're placing in your tableau. But some of them are God cards. The God cards are shuffled into this deck late during the setup so that the God cards are only in the deck at the beginning of the game. But as they come out, those are placed face down. You don't know what's on the other side. However, all of the God cards are going to have a similar type of impact on the game. If on your turn you choose a God card, you'll immediately reveal it and do whatever the God card says to do, but then that God card goes into your hand, clogging it up. So it stays there for the rest of the game. So then you only have really three spaces in your hand to hold cards that are going out into the tableau, which can have some limiting impact for sure.
Yeah.
But back to the God cards are going to let you go up on any one of the tracks that you choose. But then also the God cards have some symbols down in the lower left and right-hand corner that affect the value, if you will, on 2 adjacent provinces. So if you chose the red one to go up, the God card is going to affect the green and the yellow in this case.
And that matters because each one of these provinces is going to give you another scoring condition. Asia, you'll get 3 points times the number of power 2 cards you have, or times the number of military cards. So what I said earlier about building out this 12-card set here and trying to maximize the scoring of this 12-card set is compounded by the fact that to also maximize some of these points, you're wanting to also go up these tracks, and every card is going to move you up a different track. So I think the real decision, the real brain-burning decision in this game is when you're playing a card, is the card helping you build your 12-card strategy, or is it helping you go up the tracks you need to make some of these cards worth more points? And that is a really tough thing to decide.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables to consider, but to zero in on that one type of variable, just to explain it thoroughly, right here in Gallia, if you're in the top, if you're in the lead position, you're going to get the highest value down here. So you want to get up high, you want to be first on the track, you want to have the most military cards, or you want to have a lot of military cards, and you want to use God cards, if you're lucky enough to get them, to increase this up to potentially 3
or even 4.
Or 4. Because if you're leading here and you have a bunch of military cards, this one scoring is going to be 4 times the number of military cards you have, which can be pretty significant. Now, that's just that track. You also need to balance that with all the other tracks, because if I do really well there and Ryan does really well on the rest of them, it's really kind of meaningless. Not to mention, if he knows I'm going up on there, he's going to potentially take the military cards out of the display so that I don't get the military cards I want.
And not to mention, on top of that, using that same example, this wants you to have a lot of military cards, but the military cards themselves have their own scoring objective, which is to have sets of either power 1, 2, or 3. If you can get a 1, 2, or 3 together, it's worth the most points. So not only are you wanting to get the military cards, you're wanting to get 1, 2s, and 3s. But not only are you wanting to get those, you're also wanting to get ones that also move you up the green. So
which
you can
generally aren't military cards. They're going to be other types of cards.
So you can see already how you're juggling and balancing all of these different things. And I think that's going to kind of move into what we wanted to talk about. When we talk about this game, when we look at games like this, there's, I think, a barrier to entry, if you want to call it that, or your first play is not going to be your best play, I guess I'll say it that way. No, your first play,
unless you're able to soak up all of the scoring in short order, which a lot of people could. I'm not going to. I'm trying to understand the structure of the game. How is it played? And then I'll figure out the scoring as I go. This one, and you shouldn't do that, generally speaking, if you want to win or do well. But in this one in particular, I think if I teach this from this point forward, I am going to thoroughly start maybe even with, here's how all the different things score, talk about how the tracks score, then talk about how each of those different types of cards score at the end of the game too, so that people understand that thoroughly, and then you can explain very easily, okay, so you understand how all that's going to work. On your turn, you take a card, you play a card. That's it.
Yeah, but even somebody like me who can look at this card and completely go, okay, I understand how all this is going to score, trying to play it, trying to figure out how to make that work with this, how to kind of judge the value of a certain card at a certain time, it's very difficult to do. And I think we talk about this a lot on the channel. If a game takes multiple plays to master, are you going to come back to it for that second play if your first play was kind of a dud? And I'll be honest, our first play of this game at 2 players wasn't great.
Yeah, for a couple reasons.
For a few reasons. That being one of them. The fact that for the first half of the game, I think we were kind of stumbling in the dark, which was expected. But the second thing, I think the box says 2 to 4. I don't think this game shines, and this is maybe me being a little nice, I don't think it shines at 2.
Yeah, it's playable at 2 for sure, but this game will be significantly better at 4. And there's actually a couple specific reasons for that. One, the mechanisms of the game, going up this many different tracks. You've got 6 tracks to go up, and you can imagine this. There's a lot of games that do this at 2 player.
Sure.
So this is not unique to this game. But games that have these sorts of things, at 2 players, you'll often find yourself going up some tracks, and the other player is going up the other tracks. You might overlap on one, but usually if someone takes off at the beginning, like I went way up the green track, stupidly, but for whatever reason I went way up the green track, and that signaled to Ryan like, well, fine, I'm not going to go up the green track. I didn't even
bother.
So generally speaking, particularly at 2 players, people tend to stay in their same lanes. The other big thing, and this is related to this game specifically, those God cards that come out that are the only thing in the game that let you manipulate these tokens to go from 2 down to 1, maybe up to 3 or 4, that's only on the God cards. And in our play, the way you do it during setup is you deal out cards here, you deal everyone their 4 cards, then you deal in the God cards into this deck, shuffle it, put it down. And if you shuffled it such that a lot of the God cards are at the bottom, a lot of them might not come out. Now, on one hand, I kind of respect that, like, oh, that's interesting. So some games you might have some games you might not. But in practice, particularly in this one God card came out in our 2-player game. Now, a lot more would come out in a higher player count game. I think there are 40 standard cards and 14 God cards.
Which is quite a bit.
I think. Don't hold me to that, but I'll put text below if I'm wrong. But there's only 14 God cards. And if just one of those came out and it flipped on his turn, it came out into the display, then Ryan was able to take it. And then I just had to wait and hope and cross my fingers that another God card would come out for me to use. Now, the downside to taking and using a God card is that it clogs up your hand. I think that any player is probably going to be fine, even midway through the game, clogging up 2 of their spaces. Sure. You can't ever have more than 3 God cards in your hand, at which point you would have limited options to play cards, which would stink. As long as, if there were cards out here that you had to select from, that'd be great. But the impact that the God cards have in terms of whether or not they come out or whether they don't come out can be significant, I think, to the experience.
It's a huge part of the experience. And for me, that's where a lot of the tension and the fun comes, is like, who's going up which tracks? Which ones are they going to bump up with those God cards? Because we had one change. When you select, you move up 1 track and you adjust the 2 adjacent to it. So I adjusted Asia and I adjusted... what is that one there? Hispania. And that was it. That was the only adjustment we had in the entire game. And that takes away a lot of that dynamic scoring because you're kind of hoping, is the next God card, are they going to want to go up Asia and they're going to maybe increase the one I want them to increase? Or are they going to take mine away and am I going to have to pivot? That was completely missing from our play. And another thing too, in a 2-player versus 4-player game is that this row is going to cycle a lot more in a 4-player game.
Yeah.
In a 2-player game, we just had some cards that nobody wanted that just sat there and nobody was taking them. And every time we take one and reveal another one, those cards just remain there. And there's no real way to just like wipe them. So we didn't even really get to see as many options as you'd see. But again, another targeted thing. And this is the last thing I'll say about this for right now. It's way more fun when you're competing with a bunch of other people out here. Like David kind of alluded to, in a 2-player game, you're just like, okay, you can have it. I'm not even going to bother. But in a 4-player game, that's not going to happen. Every one of these tracks is going to be a fight to the finish to see who gets the highest scoring point value for that.
Generally speaking, I would agree. I think at 4 players, sometimes there'll be those cases where somebody jumps out to a lead on one of the tracks. The difference being, then there's 3 other people at the table to recognize that and go, well, we can't let that happen, or we let that happen. Unless, unless we want to attack him on the card front so that he can go up that track all he wants. Great, he has first place. But I can keep the cards from him and take them myself, or I can tank the value here with a God card that comes out. So all that effort is worth a lot less anyway.
Yeah, and I think just back to that whole point, us being reviewers, I think a big part of what we have to do is be able to separate, like, how was your first play of a game? And a lot of times in our just plays, that's what we've done. We've just played the game literally. Being able to separate, like, did that play fall flat versus is there a game there? And I'm in the camp that there is definitely a game here.
Oh, for sure.
Because what's happening with the cards, the way that you're having to really think about every play, like for me, that's rare. And I'm not saying this to boast or anything, but generally I can look at a situation and say, okay, this is obviously the best play and play it. Right? I think Emily's really good at that. We've got people that like, and you out there, you can look at a hand of cards and say, this is the obvious winner. But I don't think there is a situation where you're always going to have an obvious best card, because the card that might be the obvious best, I can play this too to complete my set, but I don't have anything. I may be losing on the track that scores my 2s. Or maybe I don't need to go up the yellow because I don't have anything that's the yellow scoring. So then is this really the best card even though it's completing my set of greens? And that's, for me, a very fun mental problem to solve.
It is a fun mental problem to solve. I would say on the flip side, the first experience is going to take, it's sort of a learning curve. On later games, say if there's 4 people who play this a ton, I think it might lead to people really scrutinizing their options to find that best situation, because there's towards the end for sure there's going to be math that's being done. You know, when you have 2 spaces left and you're like, okay, what are all of my options of cards that I could put in this place and how many points do they give me? I mean, that happens with a lot of games, but you're going to find that here. But I would agree with Ryan. My experience after this, and it sounds like we were a little negative. We pointed out a couple things to be sort of warned of. But I think if we played this at 4 players in our first game, it would have been a very different experience. I also think you could very quickly recognize it's, first of all, also a very fast game to play.
Oh, sure. That's a good point.
You're not doing much on your turn. Your turn doesn't do much other than move up a track. Like, that's effectively what you're doing.
Move up the tracks.
You're taking a card, playing a card, moving up a track accordingly, move on. The God cards might take a little bit more decision space, but still, like, 30 seconds or less of a turn for doing a God card. So it's going to be quick, and you can reset it and play again and have that second or have that third experience and really start to understand, like, where all the scoring is coming from. Because the scoring can be, while it's fairly straightforward, it can be complex in terms of all of the different things you're looking for. Once you realize, like, okay, I'm going to go with a blue strategy, then you can at least focus on that a little bit more. You can also get some experience to understand you can't do everything. Like, there's no way that you're like, I'm going to score well in all of the categories.
Well, and that's, again, bringing me back to my 2-player problem, in that I saw you early taking every blue that came up. So I was just like, I'll just let you take the blues, because then you're not taking the yellows that I'm trying to score, right? And again, like, if it sounds like we're being a little negative, and I guarantee we're going to get some comments from people that say, well, I like it too. And I think there's some merit to that idea. If you're that kind of gamer that loves, like, my win is your loss. I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going up the track so that you can't. That's not necessarily what I enjoy. I like the chaos of for this game, a game that's 30 minutes max. I like that chaos of people going up and down and these values changing all the time, and it, being a strategy where you have to pivot multiple times through the game. I enjoy that in a shorter time span game like this.
Yeah, I do think at 2 players, if you're a gamer who does like that, like serious, not that I would describe this as a high conflict game, but 2 players who like that a lot, there's room for them to inject it into this game.
There's hate drafting.
You
there's
can
blocking.
draft the cards, you can block, you can move up a track, you can tank. So you can do a lot of things. If you're motivated to screw things up for another player, there is a lot of room to do that in this game. But I think with that said, 4 people who aren't into that, like me, could play this together and also enjoy the game.
Right,
in its own right.
And I think in a 4-player game, you're not going to be able to just look and be like, well, in this case, every decision I made is, potentially against David. I mean, I have nothing else to consider than let's try to hurt David. But in a 4-player game, it's more spread out. You're not feeling targeted. You're not really going head to head with somebody. So I think that this is going to be the dividing line for this game, whether you like it at 2 or not.
Right. So that is Quorum. If you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll get down there and answer whatever we can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.